Yeah, I'm excited to be here with these three gentlemen. I know two of them personally for a couple of years now. Worked very closely with Hemanth, and he's basically taught me everything that I know about the whiskey world. I happened to meet Ashok 3 years ago now at Bangalore Club. That was our first meeting. And ironically, we were discussing rum then. So he's not all just whiskey. And neither is Amrut either. And then Sriram, I recently got to first actually meeting him today for the first time, but interacted a few times over the course of this journey of bringing you this conversation today. Interestingly, Sriram was telling me that there are only 5 books written globally about spirits, and actually, I think following along a journey of a brand. Which were the other 4?
Okay. So, I don't recall all of them, but one of them is a Kiwi brand. It's called Below -42. They serve vodka. There is one more on Ciroc and Irish Cream, which are 2 US and 1 UK. So this becomes the 5th in the scheme of things, in short, right? And obviously the first in India in that sense.
Yeah.
So I was asking them about why there's so little sort of coverage in that space. I'd like to hear what Ashok sir and Hemanth is going to say about that.
Well, I think today's session, we're going to cover a lot of that. We're going to cover origins. We're going to go back into time. We're going to talk about the evolution, innovation happening today, and really the future as well of Indian single malts. So to kick things off, we'll take a journey back in time. Ashok, maybe you can start off with telling us what it was like when you first started your journey into the malt space, because you don't come from this world, right? You didn't study it, you didn't grow up around it. It's completely new to you. And then I think you were thrown into it, right? So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to have a lot of you, and I was just really complimenting you all. We have published the time at 6:30 and 6:25, pretty much everybody seated. That's really awesome. Okay, so my journey with the alcohol industry itself was totally unplanned. This is something I never wanted to do myself, or something I pursued to do. I've completed my MBA in England, and when I was studying, Rakshit Jagdale, owner of Amrut Distillery, happened to be my classmate. So we studied together, and then after completing our MBA, we went on our own way. So I got into software industry. I was working and practicing ERP in Oracle. Then one fine day, Rakshit Jagdale called me over for dinner, and then told me that they are planning to launch their single malt in the UK, and they wanted me to work for them. So that is how the whole conversation started, and I'm still wondering why I have agreed. This happened 20 years ago in 2004, and one of the things that really got me interested into was I got to sell that single malt to the Scottish first. That is, I got to basically be based out of Glasgow in Scotland and start my venture there, and then basically expand into Europe. So that was really like a cool challenge that anyone can imagine to have it. So I think that one particular point really motivated me, and then thought that I really liked the UK at that point in time. So I just basically jumped in, left my really well-paying software job, like how Hemanth is earning today, jumped into this bandwagon, and then got into that. So the initial days were, I would say, probably the most challenging period that I have ever encountered in my lifetime. So I'm 50 years old. In my entire 50 years old, if I have to recall, the 5 toughest years that I faced in my life was between 2004 and 9. That 5 years was so difficult, because convincing them, especially the people in the UK with their single malt whiskey coming from India, was a Herculean task. And we have cracked it later on, that's a different story. But it was so tough because me, again, that was my first ever job in the alcohol industry. And then to sell a single malt to the Scots to start with, what an interesting start one can have.
Absolutely. Well, people don't know this, but Ashok does. Hemanth obviously doesn't just do whiskey day in and day out. He actually has an IT job, which he does full time, and then whiskey
Not a very well-paying one like me.
And whiskey was born out of a passion that he shared with his father and wanted to share with a group when he, came back to India. So Hemanth, tell us, in the past 12 years now, at least, where are we at? Tell us about the whiskey landscape that you've observed.
So first, let me start off with, where I was looking at or rather hearing to what Ashok was saying and how opposite spectrums can be. Probably I'm an example sitting right next to Ashok saying that how he left his well-paying software job and I continue doing my not so well-paid software job to ensure that I pursue my passion in terms of, and while he got into it because he liked UK, he wanted to stick to UK. I got into it because I liked whiskey and I like to probably enjoy a good tipple. That's the reason why I got into it. Yamini, coming to your question about the changing landscape, I don't think so I would be able to even recognize what was the scenario back in 2011 when I started the club. Because if Ashok is telling you, pay a lot of heed to that a little bit of nuance between his words that says that when he actually took up the challenge to sell whiskey to the Scots, we're talking about a time when Indian whiskey has probably had the lowest repute ever. We were only known for our daily tipples, low quality whiskey, and debated to be rum because it was made from molasses and things like that. So to go to the heart of where whiskey is made worldwide and to put a whiskey from India on the table and saying that this is a high quality Indian single malt, unbelievable challenge. I don't think so it would have been easy, and if he's come out of that within 5 years, I think so that's still a much better laid out plan than the 5-year plans that our government usually has, right? So that's where I think so I would start off with saying that that's how drastically the market has changed. We are seeing a lot more recognition for whiskey as a whole, as a category. We are seeing an aspiration for higher quality of whiskey. We are also looking at multiple Indian brands entering the space. We are seeing a lot more recognition globally. We are no longer shy to put out a bottle of Indian single malt on the table. So a lot has changed, Yamini, in this space.
Absolutely. I think Sriram captures it really well in the book in terms of the journey, right, and what it took. But Sriram, would you say were your biggest takeaways or surprises while writing this and gathering the information, which I know was not an easy task? Just for reference, so the conversation that we are having today was inspired by the book written by Sriram on the journey that Amrut has had over the last 20 plus years. It's not something that happened overnight. I think we were having a conversation just before this and he said he's been working on this for 1.5 years. So gathering information from multiple people, stitching it together. So maybe a 2-minute synopsis would be helpful.
Okay, obviously the one thing that I had going for me was the grit. I wanted to follow up the story. I didn't know. I just drank like everyone else to just have a good time. You just didn't know what was what. Someone got something, you just enjoyed, and over time you build that nuance. I just didn't know there was that much craft and brand building that happens behind, right? What I also had as a benefit was that I had fresh perspective. I just didn't know any of the trends. I didn't have any of the package. But as I read initial articles, right, before you even decide, again, I'll start off with the interesting question. How many levers of soft power can you think of in India other than yoga and Bollywood? Probably you'll have to grapple, probably there isn't any. Because if you look at historically in an Indian context, we've always sold generic stuff, cotton, pepper. We don't have that notion of branding, and that's a Western thing that we had to learn much later. And for me, Amrut did that. Sure, you can't use this to reach out to the Gulf. You can do it for the Western world, right? And it's gone and it's sold to the people, like they said, who are supposed to be the inventors of that category. That's one. And third, the character itself, Ashok sir, right? The whole underdog story, we all like that, right? We all want to see someone who faces these crazy odds and overcomes that. So that is the initial gradient of it. But if you look deeper, right, it was not, why did this happen? There are a whole bunch of things that had to align for it. For example, the way they went about branding it. What would you do if you want to sell something Indian to the UK? You should do what Salman Rushdie did, made, right, magical realism in India, right? You package India in a way that the West sort of like, wow, okay. And that's what they did. They've used Sangam literature in some of their branding elements. The name itself, it's a tongue twister for all the Scots, for all the tongue twisters they throw at us. Ashok sir keeps saying that. Loch Lomond, I can't say it. I'll make them say Kurunji like how the Tamilians say it, right? So like if you see that playbook, it replicates. You know, look at the movies, Kantara for example, or an RRR. What has worked is that you go local and then it goes global because of that, because it's so unique and you can tell it well because he can relate to it, right? So these were some of the things that stood out for me as I wrote it. Not to mention the other bits, but I'll stop here. I think this is a good. If I tell you everything, then you won't buy the book. Right?
Yeah, no, you should. But Ashok, you did everything when you started in the UK market, right? And I think the biggest thing is liquid to lips and advocacy building, which is what you realized was a big turning point for Amrut. Can you tell us a little bit about what were the challenges you faced in terms of this unconscious bias that people had towards the spirit? Because today Indian single malts are seen on the global stage, best in the world, right? Wasn't the case, it wasn't perceived that way earlier. So could you just run us through that journey a little bit and how we stand today?
So when we started the journey of selling Amrut single malt in the UK, we have had a blueprint where we are just basically going to follow the footstep of Kingfisher beer and Cobra beer, which was sold in majority of the Indian restaurants in the UK. So Indian restaurant, UK has allegedly about like 10,000 Indian restaurants all over the country. So our idea was like we were doing like simple maths. Okay, we just take only 50% and assume that every restaurant buy a couple of bottles a year. So 10,000 bottles a year. So that's a simple mathematics what we wanted to jump in and then start. So once I got onto the road and then started to go and meet the Indian restaurant, the story was totally different. Basically, we got the premise wrong because in the UK, the people who go to the Indian restaurant, they wanted to wash away the Indian curries with the cold beer, not with the Sprite. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, as Hemanth was telling, way back in 2004, when you go around and tell people about single malt whiskey from India, they say like we can understand chicken tikka masala and Bollywood music, but the single malt whiskey, no chance. So there was a prejudice that simply single malt whiskey from India cannot be good. So we literally got stuck there. So now the question is, we know that we have a good product. So now the question is, how do I convince you and make you to basically drink it? So after driving literally about like 150,000 miles in the first 2.5 years, 3 years period, then I just basically stood back and then we are barking at the wrong tree. So we got to do something else to basically break the ice. So then I have had a friend who ran a Whisky Club, and then he was doing whiskey tasting across different cities in the UK. So I just basically approached him, why don't we have a match, India versus Scotland. So what we'll do is, we'll pick up 3 well-known Scotch single malt brands and then pitch against 3 Amrut single malt, completely blind. So no one knows what is there in the glass. So the first whiskey tasting happened in Newcastle, where I was based at that point in time. So we had three really well-known single malt whiskey brands from Scotland, all aged 10 year, 12 year, 12 year. And then three Amrut single malt brand. We lay down, there were 60 people, completely blind, and then at the end we have asked them to basically score the whiskies based on their OLP, that is organoleptic, your nose and taste and how do you like it. And not to my surprise, two of the Amruts came top of the 6 brands. And those 3 brands are, as I said, really well-known brands. So one of the guys who attended that whiskey tasting, he had a blog for whiskies from Islay. And that guy has gone mad because he had chosen Amrut peated single malt over an Islay Scotch single malt. And on the day, he was absolutely blown away, and then he went on to create a blog called The Spirit of India and started to basically rave and write about Amrut. So that was the beginning, and then I was more than convinced that this is the route to take for time being. And then I would have done about thousands of blind tastings across the world. And then every single whiskey tasting, people were very pleasantly surprised to see the Amruts are so good when you pit against some of the well-known Scotch single malt brand. That's how we basically broke the ice.
Yes, absolutely. Hemanth, you've tasted and you work with brands across the world, right? You take members to different parts of the country and the world. You've tasted thousands of malts. Do you think there is still a bias today when it comes down to Indian single malts?
I still think that there is. And especially I think so the bias is more in India compared to the world. I mean, that's the reality, fortunately or unfortunately. But the bias exists, and the bias exists for a reason. It's not, out of context that the bias has been built. Like I was saying, I think so the very origins of Indian whiskey and the quality from the 1950s onwards has been nothing to speak about, right? So the bias will exist for some time to continue, I think. But what's happening now is there's more than adequate media attention. Look at this room. I mean, if I would have imagined us to be sitting and talking about a book written about a brand of whiskey from India, if we were sitting in a room not tasting whiskey and talking about the history of whiskey, that's a first, right? So I think so this will evolve with time. Positivity, I think so, will ensure that we get to the heights that we have. But I also caution, like I always do with every single brand that I work with, I talk to, saying that I think so this repute has taken a long time. It's taken a lot of challenges that people have, initiated. Some people have trailblazed equally well. But if we don't protect that identity, if we don't ensure that the quality remains, then I think so we're going to have the same issue in the forthcoming years as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to that later. I think there's a little bit of a controversial section as well that will come up. Sriram, you've captured that entire journey of Amrut, and we were talking about flavor, we were talking about innovation that has taken place. Amrut was one to innovate quite a bit. There were many steps along that journey, right? It wasn't just like, hey, okay, I've created this malt and now the market has to accept it. It was about realizing, do we need to increase the strength of the spirit? Do we need to create different variations? Can you maybe run through a little bit of that you've covered and why you focused on that element in the book?
Okay. Ashok has already referenced to how the hypothesis was that you'd start with the curry houses. But then he broke some ice with the blind tasting, right? So that happens. But that was not the end, right? For a typical car brand, if you look at it today in India, you need a variant for every different segment. Otherwise, you're not even a serious player. Similarly, one of the things that as Ashok sir and Amrut went through that journey, they realized they needed at least 3 variants: cask strength, peated, and the normal single malt. Correct, sir? So those 3 they needed. So that meant, okay, so the context here, right? So this is a family firm, started 75 years ago, about independence, no fancy PE money, all the profits, 100% family owned, so no equity, no funding per se, and they have to expend on something which they don't even know it's going to work, right? So this is the last push there. So they had to quickly work and develop this. That was one. Second was the packaging. Again, right? You look at certain products because they look very nicely designed. It could be the casing, even the canister, that thing that whiskeys come in. It was initially a paper canister, cardboard canister, right? So literally, that scene is something that I cannot forget. Ashok sir goes and talks to this distributor. That fellow just hits this and says, "You see, this is a problem. You need something which is steel. You can't have the cardboard. It doesn't look credible enough." Right? So then, where do you go and get a canister design? Right? This is early 2000. So the experts are sitting in the UK. So then the hunt goes into figuring out how the packaging should be done, how the naming, I mean, including the cork. Now, many of us don't realize when you pull out the cork of a whiskey bottle, even that is used for branding, right? The way you stick the labels, the way the logo, the font, all of that comes in. So they had to sit and rework that. But what's also amazing is the sheer clarity that the brand had, that we are Indian single malt period. We are not anything else. Anyway, we couldn't be called Scotch. But the guts to say that in an environment, that there's no precedent, right? We are known for all the molasses-based stuff. To say that we are going to be called an Indian single malt, and we're proud of that. That embracing of that and sticking with it. I think many brands even today, with all the IIM and IIT grads, still struggle with that sort of central question. What is our brand identity? What are we? What are we trying to sell, right? So these are some of the things that it really, really struck me as to how one person in a limited sort of a capacity with the limited resources was willing to stretch. And then you'll check maybe they can correct me, but every brand that's come out after that is following the Amrut playbook. They launch in the UK first and come back here. So that even is a testament of how they cracked the market, right? So they built that MVP, built the model, and now everyone can just play off that model now, right? Let's stop there.
That's a great point that you made. I want to ask you, Ashok, I don't think I've ever asked you, why did you all choose to start in the UK first? Why not India then?
It's going to be an extension of what Hemanth said. There was one single malt whiskey that was bottled and sold in India before we started, but that never took off. And so my chairman, past chairman Neil, he was very clear that as a country we have a bias about what we make, especially. So we have that bias that, you can't blame the consumers also, because what was put out into the market were also not up to the mark when you compare with the international brands. So our chairman made it very clear that we got to earn a name for ourselves in the West, especially across the Atlantic, not just the UK, in America also. So that's what we did. So we went, and then we got the first major breakthrough in 2009, then 10 and 11, the awards started to pour, got the recognition both in Europe and in America. That point in time, I remember 2010, we had a lot of debate at the distillery. There were a lot of phone calls and requests to the chairman that why are you not making Amrut single malt available in India? So we were literally waiting for that moment to happen. So then, to be honest with you, myself and my colleague Ricky, we were against introducing the brand in India in 2010-11. But chairman was very adamant, no, I can't answer so many people. Let us basically release in Bangalore to start with. And that's how we basically came back to India. So because we are not a country of repute for a single malt whiskey at that point in time, so there was a need for you to get a rubber stamp from the authorities, you may say, in terms of the consumers and the experts and whatnot. I think that perfectly worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just add a point there?
Absolutely.
See, apart from the UK or the Western validation that we still have a bit of that colonial hangover, India just didn't have the market. right? We didn't have the appetite to buy that liquid in early 2000s. So to some amount, there is that colonial mentality that we need the validation of the West, but there genuinely wasn't the market that there is today, right? So just one point that I wanted to add, which also would have helped them clarify that we need to go there and the India story takes off and then it comes back. And the cherry on the cake, I'll stop there. Amrut Fusion outsells all of Scotch today. 500,000 cases, sir? 500,000 bottles of Amrut. Just that one brand outsells all of the Scotch consumed in India. So sort of that India story nicely coming back to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, statistically this year it was proven that our single malts have done exceptionally well in the UK, I think, in terms of sales. But Hemanth, when you started 2011, there were 2 brands, Indian brands then, and today how many Indian single malt brands are there? And how do you see that? How have you seen that evolution and change?
With glee. To put it very plain and simple, I guess it was wonderful to see. When I started in 2011, like you rightly said, 2-3 brands at the maximum. And when Ashok was referencing people complaining to his chairman and to himself as well as to why they don't sell in India, there's an anecdote that we actually bottled something exclusively for my club based upon an email that I had sent to him back then, saying that yes, you are actually forming that bias about not supplying to the Indian consumer. We are enthusiastic about the stuff that you make. That story came a full circle around. It took 10 years though to come full circle. But yes, 2 brands to start off with in 2011. I think that the first organized survey that I did within the members of my club and a little bit of outside audience as well, we did something in 2020. That's when we had around 8 or 9 variants of single malts. I'm not talking about companies that manufacture, that were 8 and 9 variants. But then when we started to do 2021, those 8 variants shifted to 26 or 27 variants. And I think so the last survey that we did, I think the number exceeded 30 variants. And I'm not talking about those limited exclusive editions. I'm talking about the ones that sell in the open market. We have around 30 variants of our single malts. And I'm sure that when I go back to the survey and look at the number of brands that have come out with single malts, my guesstimate would be we would be close to around 45 now. So
Yeah, we track quite a few. So, Sriram, in the book, what do you feel? Again, you were looking at this from an outside-in perspective, right? No vested interest. You just wanted to tell the story. What do you believe were the pivotal moments for Amrut as a brand? What was that turning point? And then maybe Ashok, you can add to it in terms of what you felt that turning point was.
Okay, so this one, yes, in a way, there were a lot of that. Okay, one was the award that they won in 2009, 2010. But let me start back, right? Again, like I said, I'd answer this partially. The notion, think of this, you're a distiller making what everyone else is doing here, and you suddenly realize that you want to premiumize. When no one, with very little precedent, the sheer boldness Mr. Neelkanth Rao Jagdale took itself was avant-garde in that sense. That was the first moment, I would say. Then came the whole challenge of convincing, which they crossed with the blind tasting and the award that they got, right? So that was another pivotal moment. But that just pushed them on. What they did very well, okay, this I think is classic Amrut in the sense that if you look at brand A, brand B, each one does something differently, right? One could probably just flood the market and say we'll work out the marketing later. One can do the opposite. We will keep doing interesting limited variants, and then there will never be enough to go around, that whenever it is there, you pick it up, right? So that's what Amrut has done, and they've stuck to it, which is very interesting. They've slowly expanded their capacity. Obviously, things change. You can't just do one. But what stands out for me is that core DNA of theirs of constantly innovating. I've spoken to people for the book from Canada, Sweden, across the world, right? And they're all like, we would be surprised if we don't see something new from Amrut. It's almost like that's the brand identity. We don't know what will come. They've done rye whiskey, which is very hard to do technically. They've mastered it. 100% rye, which is a very tough grain to distill out of. They've done Triparva, which is a triple distilled Irish version of it. Name it and they've done it. And in fact, they've done one better. There's one expression called spectrum, where they've used a composite barrel. Whiskey, without getting too much into it, has to age in barrels, right? A core part of the flavor profile comes when you throw it in the barrel and it ages. And always in 400 years of whiskey making, no one's thought that why can't we change the staves of the barrel? It's always been the same wood. Guess what? Mr. Ashok thought of, let's get one European oak, let's get one American oak, let's get some Madeira casks, and let's build a composite barrel. And that itself is a challenge because each wood has its own mechanical properties, right? So even a Scottish guy will look up and like, oh wow, we didn't think of this. So the innovation is not just in an Indian scale, it is at the cutting edge scale of it, right? So all these things I think sort of propel the story as you go at different stages in that sense.
Any points you want to add to that in terms of the
No,
pivot?
We know that innovation is a key. Innovation is not for the sake of name shake, but there should be a substance in the liquid that what you're going to bottle. So probably he can basically vet it. We have done really a number of cool expressions which no one has ever done. And that is what I want to personally do. And no point in replicating something what somebody has already done. So what that they haven't done, what that I could do, that was our thinking right from the beginning. Today, Amrut Distilleries, as a company, we have 50 different variants of single malt. And in 20 years. And okay, of course, majority of them are limited releases. When we say limited release, we mean it. We don't bottle 200,000 bottles and call it as a limited release as some of the other distilleries do. When we say a limited release, it can be from just 200 bottles to 2,000 bottles. Most of my limited release does not exceed 6,000 bottles at the max. And then we have a core brand. Our running horse is Amrut Fusion, which you can literally find in every part of the world. That is our running horse.
I'll just add to this. I mean, a lot has been said about Amrut's innovation, their pioneering spirit, and the way that you have gone about creating new expressions in whiskey. And I'm not too sure as to within the audience if you have looked at the full spectrum of the Amrut whiskey releases. But one thing that I'll call out in terms of for any whiskey club or any whiskey aficionado to look at a brand and say and recognize saying that this brand is something to watch out for is the sustainability and the consistency. This is something that we have not probably spoken about enough from Amrut because 20 years. It's taken 20 years to build the brand for the repute that it has today, and numerous recognitions have come through the years. 2009 onwards, you're consistently being recognized for innovation, the kind of spirit that you produce, and won awards galore from any market that we recognize. So I would say, Yamini, that the turning point might have not been only the awards, which is a flash in a pan sometimes. It's been the consistency as well that's run through. So being able to keep the standards so high, ensuring that they cater to the different, asks from different markets as well. People like me always hound Ashok saying that I want something special. Can you modify your spirit a little bit towards the peated side, add a little more sherry onto it and things like that. They've catered to almost every palate. Like Sriram was saying, rye, such a difficult expression to get right. Not many people appreciate rye, but if you haven't tried the Amrut full rye, you must, because it's a mind-blowing whiskey. I mean, those are the kind of things that you would consistently look for from this brand. And I think so that for me actually completes the spectrum of a full-blooded, whiskey producing organization.
Yeah.
That's very important.
I just want to add one quick point. While you do limited releases to entice the whiskey connoisseurs, the whiskey connoisseurs are like the honeybee jumping from one flower to the other. So they basically always wanted to try, very hard to please the guys like him because they always wanted to explore something new. So while we were doing that, we wanted to ensure, for me, if someone go and buy my standard single malt, I want you to get impressed and then get pulled towards the other expression. So one classic example is Hemanth was doing a dinner tasting in Lake District in England. And then he had asked me to send a couple of bottles, something special for the tasting session. I sent him the very basic expression of Amrut. And then he was just yelling at me, what the hell you have sent? And next week, the story was totally different. So what was that?
Clearly, Ashok is using this forum to ensure that he extracts the best out of, the marketing spirit of the side of the story as well. But yes, this is a true story. I mean, while one can imagine Ashok doing tasting sessions as a master distiller, as the vice president of sales, for a whiskey club to do a tasting in the UK, it's very intimidating. First, recognition of those brands, and especially when you put out things which are very basic, entry level stuff like what he says, the standard single malt whiskey. You already have got a mental notion saying that, okay, I don't have anything special on the table. I need to rally around the spirit that I have on the table with this audience who's pretty well, let's say, used to very high quality single malt whiskeys. So that's when I saw what he had sent, I'm like, oh God, this is going to be difficult. But then I think so the ideation and the story is absolutely bang on. That single malt really not only impressed the audience, it impressed even me when I was doing the tasting session, saying that even the standard single malt has got a lot of juice to offer. Today, I have said this on many forums and I stick by my word. Don't need Ashok or don't need myself to do a tasting session for you guys. If you are interested in whiskey, try it blind. Put out these expressions which are from India. Compare them with standard expressions that are coming from any part of the world. Try it blind. I think that I can confidently say that we will not come out at the bottom for sure. We will definitely have some, brands and variants featuring in the top 3 segments. That I can assure you of, right?
Since you were talking about tasting, I'm not sure how many people in the audience have experienced something like that. So Ashok, maybe you can give us a 101 on when you first open up a bottle of whiskey, what are you supposed to do? You look at it, you smell it, taste it, you all together, do you wait it out? That's been covered by Sriram a little bit in the book, but maybe if you could talk about it.
Okay, I will just basically perhaps start with what I did wrong when I started to drink my first whiskey. At the age of 21, still we had a big social taboo back home. You can't drink in front of parents or with the authorization of parents, no question. So we basically got blended whiskeys available in the market in those days, pour into the glass and bang. So then once I got into the industry, I realized the mistake that what we have been doing all these years. Any alcohol for that matter. So first of all, you got to absolutely enjoy it in moderation. You cannot exceed a threshold for longevity and for a good health as well. You can't overdo it. And the second thing is, first thing is, you got to nose, that means you got to smell the whiskey or brandy or rum or gin, whatever you're going to drink. Because first of all, your brain and the body has to accustom to the flavor of the spirit, what you're going to drink. And once you spend some time in smelling it, the brain just basically get adapted to the spirit that you are nosing. And then you spend really some good five minutes at least to smell it. Then you take one sip and hold it onto your mouth. Don't swallow it. Just hold it onto your mouth. Now, when you, for example, sip a whiskey at 42.8% alcohol by volume, and when you put it into the mouth, one sip, and hold it onto your tongue, so what happens is, already you have smelled that particular whiskey. The flavors are basically absorbed by the brain. Then when you put it onto the palate, all of us are going to secrete some saliva from the side of the tongue. So your own saliva will cut down the strength of the spread from 42.8% to further down, maybe like 35 or 36 or 37. In the meantime, you just kind of chew the whiskey like chewing the food. Then what happens is your whole palate is coated with the spirit that you're going to drink. And then when you swallow, from there, everything is going to be an absolute smooth affair because the body is accustomed to the flavor. Then you didn't just gulp it, you just basically tasted it with the whole taste bud immersed with the spirit, and then you drink it. So that's how this is basically for a product like a single malt whiskey where you spend 3, 4, 5, 10,000 rupees a bottle. It is essential for you to capture the nuances in terms of the flavor profile and try to put a name to the flavor. Whiskey, for me, whiskey nosing is the most complex that you can have because you are talking about 150 different chemical components in a glass of whiskey. And those have a different perception in terms of the flavor that what it can offer. And for you to basically smell it, disintegrate, and put a name to it is so difficult. That itself is a big challenge and fun. And that's how I would recommend.
Yeah, thank you. Sriram, through the journey of writing this book, how many whiskeys have you tasted with the family? Tell us maybe one or two things that you learned or did wrong. And I think one more anecdote that you shared with me earlier in terms of something interesting you found out about, distillers, master distillers, and what they don't eat.
All right, so I think I'll start with the second, which is a little bit more interesting. Obviously, as you read about whiskey, you get bombarded with these fancy organic compounds, all the chemistry that went over your head when you were trying to learn. And suddenly it looks different. It is complex, right? But what I also sort of stood out for me was the regimen someone who's a master distiller has to go through. So for instance, Ashok sir does not eat bitter gourd, period, if he's tasting it, right? So there is a certain discipline that you have to follow, a lifestyle changing. You have to kick the, you can't have tobacco because that messes with your palate. And these are tough decisions, for anyone to give up on certain dietary things and to follow that, right? Maybe you were okay once in a while, but to follow that through, right? All across. So that was very, very interesting for me. And again, little geeky, I'll just go one step further. How are you supposed to taste it? There are broadly 2-3 approaches to it, right? One, you ideally want to do what the customer is going to drink it like. So no customer is going to not eat bitter gourd, probably eating all the, kurkures and lays and having it, a typical way you would eat it. So you would have to sort of mimic that because you're trying to get a sense of how the consumer is going to taste it, right? That's one end of it. The other end is the more Japanese way. I am going to eat only this many portions of this. A crazy quantification that you can do to the nuance. And Ashok sir had to evolve his own sort of mechanism to figure that out between these two, average this out. So he's worked out a system over time, right? And again, since he said that as an extension, one of the nice things about writing the book was that I didn't just get to see the barrels, I also got to see the chemistry lab at the back, right? So where you would have the typical beakers and whatnot, and I'm just sort of sipping it, and he's like, when you're tasting whiskey, you don't drink it. Whiskey is for business. You have to spit it out, otherwise you'll be too high. But then there was one thing that I popped in my mouth, and he's like, if you spit this out, I'm going to beat you. This is $1,000 a pop. No one's drunk this. You get the luxury to do it. It was the Greedy Angels, a very uber limited edition, right? So there were these really, really interesting moments, and I think that's also about who he is, right? Such serious things, he'd just bring in this crazy humor, and I'm like, okay, that's how you wanted to tell me after I drank it, not before. So, so there are lots of these things that sort of play out in that, right?
It's definitely a journey for sure.
And the last question, the first question, I missed that. How much whiskey did I drink? Let me just say, it just changed. I had to drink a lot of it. I, in fact, did a tasting with Hemanth because how do I convince you guys? Just like Ashok sir's problem, right? If I simply just write something without knowing how the product, how your tasting is done, right? So I had to do that largely in the research, but I could bum one off here and there saying research. So all of that did happen, right? So that's how it was done.
Great. Let's shift gears a little bit, go into a bit more about the entire industry and the whiskey industry. Hemanth, you alluded to this a little earlier, right? There are so many brands that are coming out. There's an entire conversation on casks, sustainability, product quality? What are your views on today's landscape and the future for Indian malts?
Before I get into that subject, which is pretty much, I guess, everyone's worry or everyone's looking forward to what this specific segment of whiskey is going to evolve. I just want to draw attention to the fact saying that this has not been a consistent and easy journey from an Indian market perspective. I don't know how many of you know that the first, or rather the origins of Indian whiskey or proper distilled malt whiskey is around 1820. Kasoli is the distillery and known by Mohan Meekan and the Old Monk rum. Those are the first people who actually did pot still distillation back in that time. I'm talking about 1820. That's when they established themselves as Dyer Meekan, and then they went through multiple changes of name. But today, if you go back to Google and search, probably 1855 is the date that they claim in terms of the actual registration. So that's quite a while ago. And very recently, I got to know saying that they were exporting single malt, or they never used to be a concept of single malt. So they were exporting something that was known as pure malt at that stage around the 1920s, 1930s. So India has seen some success back then as well. But then it took a nosedive. And I'll get to that question because it's very related. Because once the people who were guarding the quality, guarding the entire premise of producing such a unique spirit, left the premise and they did not manage the factory anymore, they did not manage the distillery anymore, the quality started deteriorating. So that set the precedence of having low quality, high volume output, more in terms of catering to the market out here. That led to what we have, what I refer to from the 1950s to the 1980s or 1990s, where Indian whiskey or the entire premise of Indian whiskey was utterly shunned, saying that you guys don't know what you're doing. It is just for intoxication that you people are producing any kind of spirit. I think while I appreciate the number of brands that are coming in now, there in the modern era, of course, Amrut are the pioneers. They established the identity of Indian whiskey worldwide through recognition, through the expressions, through Ashok's traveling, through multiple, tasting sessions, etc. But the fact remains that even today, I guess we are at a higher risk in terms of this quality deteriorating. Because everything that anyone sees today is probably the glitz and glamour that attracts them, saying that yes, why can't we? We have been producing malt, we have been producing whiskey, we have been producing spirits for generations together, and there are a lot of distilleries in India that have done this over a period of time. And now they are having probably thoughts, the second generations are having the thoughts saying that I can probably emulate what Amrut did, what Paul John did, what Rampur did, all of these brands that have stood out in terms of, their quality, their recognition globally. But the journey is not going to be easy. All that Ashok spoke about, saying that challenging scenarios about presenting an Indian whiskey to remove the bias, it's very difficult to do. And in the Indian ecosystem about the excise laws, I can tell you that it's even more difficult to do. So Yamini, my submission is yes, I am very thrilled when a new brand comes out with an output, because clearly they have put some thought into it, they have put some effort into it. But I'm more worried today saying that the identity that we have taken 20 years to recreate after a gap of almost 80 years, are we going to put that at stake? Because today we don't have a forum like the Scotch Whisky Association which govern the quality of the produce that we have. So with the lack of such an organized, market, I think so we are ever so, averse, or rather prone to the risk that is always sitting about someone. I mean, it's happening already. It happened to Japan. It's happening already in India. You see so many whiskey brands sitting in Africa, sitting in probably underdeveloped countries that call themselves single malt. But we don't know the origins, we don't know about the authenticity, we don't know about any of those details. So very worried, but equally thrilled as well.
Yeah, I think just in the last 2 years, right, the entire conversation on Indian single malts has just skyrocketed. So much so that as a company, we get queries almost this year, just 5 family businesses, who've been doing something in the malt space, wanting to create their own B2C brand. They were always a B2B player. So how difficult is it to create a brand, especially in the spirit world?
Sorry,
How difficult is it to create a spirit brand today?
create.
To come up with a new brand.
It's going to be very challenging for any brand per se. It may be easy for you to sell your first bottle, and to make somebody to buy the same bottle again is what the real success is. And that's not going to be easy unless you tick all the boxes, like quality of the spread, the pricing, the packaging, the branding, all has to basically fall in. To be very honest with you, in the today's world, if we got to basically build an Amrut brand right from the scratch, starting from today, I would say I'll be worried. We definitely had that advantage of the first mover with all the challenges, of course, but we enjoyed that pedigree, being the first mover into the market. Like for example, I'm pretty sure, like for all of us in India, back in those days, if it is a Sony television, we just absolutely fall in love. So hard to get, but we know what the quality of the Sony television is. Still, it's a kind of hallmark. So that's a kind of cult status that what we enjoy. But building a new brand today and sustain it over 2-3 decades and keeping up with the momentum is challenging. It all depends on, again, aspiration, what kind of volumes and levels that you wanted to achieve and sustain is another question. We have taken up the route that we absolutely don't want to be kind of stupid. We can easily go and expand our distillery 5 to 6 times more than what we can produce today. But we know how difficult it would be to sell it as a brand. That's why our expansion being very, very cautious. We from 300,000 liters, we went to 900,000 liters. Now we are going to go to 1.2 million liters. There are many distilleries who are already producing 2.5, 3, 4 million liters a year. But we know how difficult it will be for you to basically bottle it and sell it as a brand. It's going to take a big time. So it depends on what kind of card that you want to play. So we are very clear that this is how our model is going to be, and we stuck to that. And again, like at the moment you go and produce like 100,000, 200,000 cases a year, then the question of checking the quality batch by batch is going to be very difficult for a master distiller. Whatever I'm doing now, I can't replicate that. I'll be sitting at the distillery 24/7 tasting sample. Impossible. So that's what it is.
Okay. Going back again a little bit into the industry a bit, let's talk about maturation. I think that's a hot topic, right? Because a lot of brands today are going ahead with no age statements. That's the current trend. So Sriram, you want to add to that conversation on maturation that you've covered a little bit as to the genesis of how it actually started as part of an accident, and then maybe Hemanth, you can talk about maturation today and why there is that no age statement, and Ashok, maybe you can add to it as well.
Okay. So one other point, I'm just going to digress because I think it's important to be said, what they've said in terms of concern, okay? Here's a statistic, okay, just quickly to summarize it. According to an RBI report on the state finances, 2018-2019, the entire excise, the tax on alcohol across the country was about 1.51 trillion rupees, right? And the same year, the army budget was 1.55 trillion, right? So we have this inherent hypocrisy, contradiction, however you want to phrase it. On the one end, you have to drive this Gandh Indian temperance. On the other end, your state is unviable if you don't tax alcohol. Leave Gujarat out of it, that's an exception because they've industrialized. But barring Karnataka where we sit, a fifth of their revenue comes from excise. Now, I mean, as a statesman, already you're running short of money. Are you going to forego this? So at one level, there's no chance for a prohibition. It's just not viable for many states, right? Some have done it to their own loss, but it's just not viable. On the other end, just when there are innovations happening, right, you don't, for example, they don't get a GST input benefit. So there are these troubling issues that the industry faces, right? On the one end, there is these cutting edge innovations that you're doing, but the regulation does not allow. Not to even mention that you're dealing, as a brand sitting out of Bangalore, they're dealing out with 28 states and 8 union territories. Each state has its own, one fellow will say put the label here, one fellow will say add one more thing. So standardizing something is very, very challenging. So you have to, it's hard to supply from one place. So these are all the, teething problems that the industry faces, adding to that. And I think it's very stark how that sort of plays out. Now, coming to the more pleasant stuff about how whiskey took off, right? Initially, the choice of tipple of the fancy bourgeois in Europe in the 1900s was brandy. That's what you went, it's what you retired to after your meal. You had a cup of brandy. But suddenly an aphid, a small sort of an insect, comes and devastates all the vineyards around France, right? So then what happens is then immediately the Scotland, because of other historical factors, including how Henry VIII just threw out confiscated all the church property, all these friars who knew how to distill were out of jobs. So they moved into Scotland and they started building these stills because they had the expertise. So just as this goes down, that takes up. And they put it in a barrel like they always did and they sent it out. And only because it took so much time to get from A to B there, that's when they realized there's something to do with maturation and the wood is actually making that feel better, right? So that's when whiskey or single malt takes the position of brandy in the late 1900s. So a little bit of that context there.
I don't think so. I should be speaking before Ashok on maturation. So Ashok, please.
Maybe Ashok,
I think so. Outside in perspective, I guess I can share. The one thing that I will say is that a lot has been said about maturation in India. All right. One thing that clearly is probably a media statement saying that we accelerate maturation 3 times compared to Scotland. And it is true. I mean, the kind of quality that comes out of the barrel once it spends X amount of time. When you compare it with the equivalent amount of time in any other part of the world, especially Scotland or Ireland, where this tradition has been going on for centuries together, I think so the quality or the accelerated maturation is a phenomena which has been established. It has been scientifically proven as well, saying that there is definitely more extraction. So when you talk about maturation, you talk about the flavors of the wood actually imparting themselves within the whiskey, right? So that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about Indian maturation, I think so definitely it is got because of the tropical climate, because of the kind of temperatures that we have, with the humidity that exists in different parts of the country. It makes a lot of difference in the way that the whiskey actually comes out of the barrel. What I don't hear from most headlines is the facts of the losses. That accelerated maturation comes at a huge price. They lose around 10% year on year for evaporation. Now this, compared to any other established whiskey producing nation, is against a 2% out there. So you're already at an 8% loss at the start. Second, why don't Indian whiskies have age statements? It's very difficult to get an age statement out, because just imagine 8 years into Indian whiskey and your barrel is almost empty. And then if you put an 8-year-old whiskey on the label, someone who's having another brand next to it which says 10, 12 years old, the general notion in India is going to be, oh, that's a 12-year-old whiskey, that's got to be better than the 8-year-old whiskey. Not knowing, saying that almost the empty barrel, what was the residue of the barrel has gone into that 8-year-old whiskey, which is an example of the greedy angels. So that's the second aspect. The third aspect is saying that accelerated maturation, which I want Ashok to probably educate us a bit about, has it's got its own perils as well. Something that's created within a shorter span of time, it's also equally difficult to hold together. So to ensure that the balance of the whiskey retains itself, when you put water, when you put, some people would like to put some ice, some people add adventurous one add coke as well into that and things like that. There's definitely a change in the equation there. To be able to balance all of this is a very, very difficult, and it is beyond science. It's, I think so, an area which actually converges science and art. So a little bit more upon that, Ashok, will really help the audience in terms of the maturation.
Maturation, okay, is a phenomena where when you distill malt spirit from malted barley, you will have the spirit like this, water, okay, in terms of the color. So all the color that you get is coming from the oak wood in which the spirit is being matured. Apart from the fact that, for example, Scotch whiskies, you are even IMFL, that what we bottle in India, you are allowed to use caramel coloring to add to the ice. But all the single malt that we bottle is 100% natural color, regardless of how dark or how light it is. Okay, coming back to the point of maturation, the very purpose of maturation is when we distill a malt spirit from the still, is going to have a lot of flavor and also is going to have a lot of roughness. So our idea is to remove the roughage from the spirit, make it more palatable and add character to it. For example, a vanilla flavor in the whiskey is 100% coming from the oak barrel. Because in a new make spirit that you distill out of the still, you are not going to have any vanilla. Then a lot of caramel note, again, is coming from the wood itself. So, from that point of view, maturation is very, very important. Now, the most interesting fact is every country and every city in the world is very different with regards to the atmospheric pressure, is with regards to the weather condition, in terms of the temperature, humidity, everything play together to determine what's going to come out of the cask as a whiskey. So even within Scotland, what is measured in Dalwhinnie, which is allegedly like the highest distillery, to Glenkinchie, which is near Edinburgh Lowlands, is a very different altitude. So very different atmospheric pressure, very different humidity condition. So within themselves, there is a lot of different. So forget about India. For example, Bangalore is, for me, it's an absolute blessing. It's so unique. It's sitting at literally 3,000 feet above the sea level. Average mean temperature of like 28 degrees year round, and then relative humidity of about 50 to 60%. So I keep telling everyone, Amrut is the missing link between Scotland and Kentucky. Because the way how we distill spirit is very similar to Scottish, but when it comes to maturing the whiskey in the barrel, we lean more towards Kentucky because we also have a very dry climate where strength of alcohol goes up in the barrel, whereas in Scotland it goes down, totally the reverse. So Bangalore is offering such it's a huge variation in humidity as well. Now, as the rain is lashing, it's very, very humid now. But come in January, you will dip down to 18 to 20% relative humidity. Absolutely dry. So this variation between the season make things very, very unique in terms of what the liquid is going to come out of the cask. So from that perspective, every part of the world where the whiskey is being matured is going to offer you a very different profile. For example, we have done a study. We matured one barrel in Bangalore. We have a carbon copy in the UK. And then we compared it after 3 years. Very different. Very, very different. The 3-year-old in Bangalore is way, way better than what was matured in the UK because it's very cold and damp. Because of that reason, it takes a minimum of 10 to 12 years to take the roughage from the spread, make it more palatable. And that's how historically you started to see the age statement of 10, 12, 15 years old, which gives you an assurance that by maturing it for 10, 12 years, you have really a palatable whiskey. So we have a lot of whiskies which are like just aged for 3 years from Scotland, which we use it for our blended whiskies. That would be undrinkable on its own when you compare a 3-year-old single malt matured in Bangalore. That's how important maturation is, but it's all going to depend on the climatic condition that you are in.
Yes. I liked how you alluded to it being an art because it really it's art and science. Tell us, what are the current trends that you're seeing today in terms of innovation, brands, consumer perception?
Question is to me. Okay.
I think it could be to any of you.
I think so. Very interesting the way that India is speaking on whiskey and the kinds of variants of whiskey, all right. Usually, there used to be a lag between what was happening in the European and the US markets for it to finally land into India. So, there used to be a lag of, around 3 to 4 years, 5 years, probably, depending upon the kind of, area that you're talking about. Technology used to take a little bit faster in terms of the transition. But something like whiskey was taking a, extended period of time in terms of how they were landing in India. So I think so today, if you ask me as to what the trends are usually the ask for exclusive bottling. That's one trend that is growing up. Everyone wants exclusivity. Everyone wants a special edition. They're looking for sherry-oriented whiskies. A lot of them, the phenomena is very new. For us, whiskey, and Ashok was talking about tasting some time ago, and I was hoping Yamini would put a bottle in front of us, but then that didn't happen. So, when, I don't know how many of you have observed this phenomena when people drink in India. They have got this grimace on their face when they take the first sip. Right? I mean, there's a very notable grimace saying that, oh God, this is going to kill me, but they still love to take that spirit in, right? And from that phenomena to change to something, oh my God, this is sandalwood and aromatics coming from the glass, is a very, very unique proposition. And when that happens, it automatically starts the sensories to evolve in that way, saying that, all right, this is something that I've never experienced. And that's what's happening to the Indian market. So if you take a good sherried whiskey, and today a lot of Indian brands are doing sherried whiskey, the color itself will start appealing to you. We have never seen whiskey so dark. So whiskey as dark as rum is an unknown phenomena. So all these are exciting the consumers. I think so that's where they're getting hooked on. They're getting actually attracted, saying that yes, this is something that I've never experienced before. And while people can talk about gin, rum, etc., whiskey is one probably spirit that's got a spectrum of flavors. There's something for everyone. It's just a question of finding that right whiskey. And it's a difficult find. Yeah. So that's where I guess I'll end my statement about it.
I remember it was early this year or last year. We were doing a whiskey tasting with Hemanth, and he's created this really cool model where you pick the whiskey and then it'll kind of tell you all of these flavors that you could potentially taste, right? Some of it had leather, it had burnt tire, it had all these really, really strange things. But really when you see it and then you smell it or you taste it, you're like, oh my God, yes, I actually taste leather. Like, that's so strange. But I think we can talk for hours up here on the topic. But what we'll do now is we'll open it up to the audience. We're going to do a Q&A. So Advaita is over there in the audience, and just feel free to raise your hand, ask any questions, and we'll pass around the mic. Yes.
Hi, my name is Shubham Girdhar, and my question is for the regional liquor brands and also like liquor brands going global from India. So, whenever we travel across India, we get to notice these very specific local liquor, but we rarely see like a brand going global with that particular liquor. For example, Goa has Feni and Northeast has rice beer. And we always see like, hey, when will it go global? But then you see the story of Amrut and they say, like, hey, they finally cracked it. Has something changed in the global market, or we have evolved, or the global market was always looking for brands and we weren't like up to the level that they were looking for? Like what has changed, and like how can these local liquor can go global?
I'll maybe take that one to start with. I think that a lot of the spirits that were native to India were pre-colonial, okay? And during the colonial phase, a lot of them were actually banned. It's like Mahua, Feni, a lot of it was banned. Production was stopped. There were actually policies put in place to stop the production of it. So it's taken a long time. I think some of these laws still exist, like the Maura Act, all of them still exist that are getting abolished now. So it's going to take a while. But the good news is that native Indian spirits today are taking center stage. I think it's going to grow at a much faster pace than any of the other spirit brands or spirit categories, let me say. And it's just a matter of time. And I know for a fact that even the biggest players are all investing in native Indian spirits like rice beer, like Mahua, like Feni, like other ones. So I think it's just a matter of time.
And the second part of the question, like, has something changed in the global market? Like they were always looking for it, or like Amrut got very good acceptance? Something changed, or
I think today every single country has indigenous spirits that are native to them, right? Like, for example, like sake is from Japan, all of that. India has its own native spirits. I think it's just, yes, consumers are more open to it. But on your second question, I think maybe Ashok might be better suited to answer that.
For example, Feni, the Western tourists who has been to Goa, they have definitely tasted Feni, and many people basically asked about when I was going to the United States or the UK. For example, Mahua now, there should be an education. Now, a brand owner has to take it to the global market, let the consumer to taste it, explain to them, because it's basically an unknown. And then there are, for example, countries like United States, initially it's going to be tough because TTB, which is a controlling arm for registering your label in the first place, and then you will be able to sell it. When Amrut started, there was no provision to register a single malt whiskey from India at all. So we got to literally fight with them for over a year to get Amrut label approved and then get it sold in different states within the United States. So these are all the challenges that one has to face when you come with an indigenous spread. Because, for example, for them, for Scotch and Irish, it's a cut and paste of the Scotch regulation and Irish regulation. Whereas for an Indian, there is no such agreement, bilateral agreement with the United States yet. So these are the things that will evolve over a period of time. So someone has to basically build a cat, or someone has to basically make the first move, go through a rough path, and then get everything. For example, if I'm not wrong, Amrut is the first distiller in India to work with the excise department and the Indian Institute of Science to create a platform to have a maturation loss allowance, because Scottish weather will let you to lose only 2% a year, but I am losing here 10% a year. There was no provision in the excise law. So then we basically work with the excise department, Indian Institute of Science, put all the professors in, take a study how the barrels basically lose every year, and then formulated a excise regulation to give a provision to have about 7% maturation loss per year in Bangalore. We are the first distillery to do that. Because why? You are the first mover, so you have to do all the hard work. So that's how it is.
Sorry, I was just going to add another side of the element of the story, I guess, which is equally important, is the mindset itself. Now excuse me. So your question itself was motivated from the fact that probably you recognize the potential of those spirits, of those beers that you mentioned, having tasted something in parallel, saying that you recognize the potential, saying that it could have been exported as well, it could have found a place in the global market, right? That mindset change, saying that the spirit or whatever that we are producing is at global standards, it's something that we can offer to the world. I think so that's a mindset change that we are undergoing right now. The second generation, the third generation from these families are evolving because they've seen the world, they've studied outside, they've got that exposure, so they know the stuff that they're bringing out is equally good in terms of what the world is producing. The confidence in the storytelling, at the end of the day, if you look at a whiskey bottle, I think so one of the most appealing things is the story that goes behind it. And Amrut has woven that story extremely well with our Indian culture, the name, everything has come together really well. That confidence to be able to tell that story to the world and have them listen to your history and the genesis of that spirit is a very unique proposition. And that's just going to balloon from here. That's what I think.
Yes, we have another question.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Madan Mohan. I started my career in liquor industry. After graduation, immediately I joined a reputed company, served in various parts of South India only. And I want to know, now we talk about single malt. They have to use one grain. That one grain which is widely available in this country, or we have to import from outside.
The global definition almost all over for a single malt whiskey is it has to be 100% produced from malted barley only. So you can't use, for example, you can't use wheat or corn and call it as a single malt.
Barley widely available in this country.
Oh yeah, we have a huge barley growing region in Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan. So, for example, in Amrut, 90% of the barley that we use is grown in those regions. We also import about 10% from Scotland. That is for a different reason. But we try to use as much as local as possible. So all the barley varieties that we process at Amrut, 90% is homegrown, malted locally in India.
And
Of course, since I connected with this industry, I see every tap putting a single malt. From where they are getting so much?
it is.
So there is a lot of it's a very good question. In fact, you asked. For example, Japan literally import about 90% of the barley from Scotland. Taiwan, almost all the barleys are imported from Scotland because they don't grow locally. At least in our case, I would think that we are really self-sufficient at the moment. Enough of barley is grown in India to cater to our requirement.
And what's unique about India is that we have 6-row barley as compared to 2-row barley. So that's what's unique about it. Yes, gentlemen.
Hi, my name is Harsh Lal. I wanted to ask, I think there was a mention about brandy and I mean also cognac with it. So brandy, and then because that kind of came down, it led to whiskey. And now it seems like, and I want to confirm this from you guys, is that whiskey, the more it is being matured, the longer it's being matured, it's getting the fineness, the smoothness, whatever other characteristics of cognac. So is whiskey getting closer to cognac now? Is that the trend? Is that what, I mean, a great whiskey, is it compared now to cognac? Is that the way it is?
Okay, so obviously cognac is produced from grape grown in the Cognac region in France. And whereas whiskey is completely grain based. If it is a single malt whiskey, it's a 100% malted barley. Now, you have single malt whiskies aged from 4 years to 80 years. Now, depends on how deep your pocket is, so you would buy that. Obviously, a 50-year-old single malt. Not always necessarily, but in general, 50-year-old single malt is going to be absolutely brilliant in terms of the taste profile. The reason is uh, it is sitting in the cask for 50 years. So the oxidization of the alcohol happens inside the cask over the period of 50 years. On the other hand, simultaneously extracting the wood character from the cask. So both basically work in tandem, and then as you go by years, is going to become very soft and smooth and more fruity and more flavor. I will not necessarily compare. Again, when you say cognac, you have a VSOP, you have a XO, you have a Louis XI, Louis the 13th. So it depends on how deep our packet is. But obviously, Louis the 13th is really a fine vintage of cognac. And when I say fine vintage, sometimes you look at, I know all of you know that probably, a Chatu 1994 will be like $3,000 a bottle. Same Chatu 1995, you can get it for $100 a bottle. You'll be wondering what the hell is going on. So in 1994, you had that perfect weather where you had the rain at the right time, you had the sunshine at the right time, everything is on time. You produce an exceptional quality of the grape, and that's why that particular vintage cost a bomb. Whereas in 1995, everything got screwed up. You didn't have rain on time, no sunshine on time. So the grape variety is not really up to the mark. That's why the same brand is $100 a bottle. So coming back to the question of cognac and whiskey, there is no really comparison because the base spread itself produced from a different origin. And cognac has a very different rules when it comes to maturation. So they all basically matured in a bigger size vat, meaning like very big oak barrels, whereas whiskey cannot be matured more than 700 liter size barrel as a rule. So it's basically a different proposition altogether. Sometimes when you have it a blind, you will get confused like whether it is really whiskey or brandy. It can be very close, depends on the profile that what you're going to have, but not necessarily is going to be the same.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Like you said, there are lots of new brands coming into the market, and a lot of people are trying different kinds of things. What do you think are some of the interesting new things that are going to happen, like the meaningful new things that are going to happen in this whiskey space? And what do you guys think of flavored whiskey, the fireballs of the world, because that's what is accessible to young people. Scotch is not. So just your thoughts on that, please.
I'll protect you because you're from a brand, and probably to a certain extent I can take the bullet because I don't have any brand of my own, so I can probably get away with saying something. So I think that when it comes to flavored whiskies, I'll answer that question first. If you go to any whiskey producing organization, whether it's in India or outside, they will tell you saying that keeps the till running. You can scream from the roof about your aspirations for a high quality single malt and getting more and more exclusive, but that's what keeps the lights on. Most of the brands, all right. That's where I guess it's very important to cater to that market. And when you're looking at the people who actually consume those flavored whiskies, they are looking largely for intoxication. They're looking to have a good time. They're not looking to get to a glass of whiskey and spend hours with it, right? So they just want to get it done quickly. Let's have a good time. I guess that's the market it is made for. And I think that market has got its place, because when you spend some time in that market and then evolve, I think so then you start appreciating the true quality of it as well. So I guess that's got its own place under the sun. What I think is going to be an interesting place to watch out for is, now if you look at Amrut has spent around 20 years. They have recognized how to work well with the weather. They have recognized as to how to work well with the casks and the production cycles, how the market responds to them. All of that recognition has come. Now you will see the strength actually coming through, not only from Amrut, from many brands as well. since they recognize what's the base spirit, the quality, the character of the distillery, they know how to leverage the best out of it. And that's what's going to happen with a distillery like Paul John as well. They know that they're next to the, sea. That salt influence in that whiskey is something that they're going to leverage. It's a very interesting phenomena that even if it's 500 kilometers away, the styles of the whiskey are very, very different. So recognizing their strengths and bringing out variants from them, I think so you're going to see a lot more of that happening. The third thing that I think is going to happen very, very rampant in the next 5 years is that everyone's going to recognize this, saying that, all right, I think that the people who are selling malt for a period of time, and there are many distilleries in India that do so, they're going to recognize, saying that I think my stuff is good, but I don't know how to evaluate. Let me try to get someone as an independent bottler to bottle that. So an independent bottler is a phenomena. I just buy the liquid from someone. I put a label on that. I may choose to declare as to where it is from. I may not choose to do that. But that's something that's going to hit the Indian markets very soon. And of course, the last but not the least is what Amrut and the friends in India actually probably don't prefer, the FTA that's likely to happen, the free trade agreement between the UK.
I'll just, sorry.
Positives and negatives.
Yeah.
about-
I'll just add to that on a general industry perspective. So today, if you look at brands across spirit categories, not just malts, everyone is moving into the entire premiumization game. And so you see legacy brands as well, that they're going to be creating products that were mass market. Now they're going to create ones that are more expensive in the premium game. At the same time, you're going to see a lot of brands come in and do a lot of more affordable range products. And that's where you're going to see a lot of the flavor profiles come in. It's not necessarily to do with brown spirits, but in your white spirit categories, you're going to see a ton of different flavor profiles come through. From jamun vodka to like orange rum to all sorts of things.
While there has been extensive talk and discussion about elite and sophisticated stuff in terms of single malt, and my question is pretty much from a common man or layman standpoint. Forgive me if this is out of the context, but this has been intriguing. How do you personally look at, or what's your personal take on the rise and fall of Old Monk? I like to have Ashok probably answer that question. And what may be your strategies to revive the brand? Because what baffles me is the brand that is overlooked here has many takers out in Europe and US. But I'm very curious to know why is such a contrasting side to this particular brand, which pretty much had no advertisements right from times immemorial, and why is it gone towards the drastic decline in terms of the sales from a domestic standpoint? The rise and fall of Old Monk.
In my experience, Old Monk is one of the iconic brands from produced in India. A couple of takeaways. The flavor profile of Old Monk itself, and then people of my generation at least, we all used to drink Old Monk when we were in the college. We grew up drinking with that. And now what we are finding is the rum market is evolving very differently now. And why Old Monk has not marketed, why they had up and down, something I don't want to comment on, or I cannot comment on. But all I can say is there is a considerable shift in the rum category now. More and more premium quality rums are evolving. For example, 100% natural rum, produced by us, produced by Indri from north of India, all premium. Probably you can buy 4 or 5 bottles of Old Monk for 1 bottle of this. So premiumization is happening, where Old Monk is basically a flavored rum. So we have a flavored rum as well called Old Port. So these are all basically million case brand for us. And Old Monk brands are available in the United States, in the UK, some of the European Union countries as well. This gentleman knows much about the distillery than I do, because he has been to the distillery also.
Very interesting question, and I guess let me answer that in three phases. One is about the rise and fall of it. All right, when Old Monk started, Old Monk was one of the first rums to actually mature malt as a part of their rum. So they were not purely molasses rum. So if you get a bottle of a very old bottle of an Old Monk rum, it will actually tell you saying that it is 7-year-old matured rum, okay? And it will tell you saying that it's got malt content in it as well. So clearly, when actually the phenomena of rum started from Mohan Meakin, it was a proper military rum. Solon, or rather Mohan Meakin, has got a very strong relationship with the defense forces. And after Dyer Meakin moved out from the distillery, that entire distillery has been run from brigadiers to army generals, etc. That entire family belongs to the army. So they had a very close relationship with the defense personnel, right? In terms of the quality, that's why probably the quality of that rum was so high back then that it became very popular. And that kind of a story, you'll find a similar analogy to probably one of the largest selling whiskies in the world, which is Johnny Walker Red Label. Today I call it a paint stripper, but if you pick up a Johnny Walker paint stripper, absolutely can't drink it because it's really, really rough to drink, Johnny Walker Red Label. But if you actually, yeah, I can say it probably because I don't work for any brand, so I'm at authority to say it. But if you actually pick up a bottle of the same Johnny Walker Red Label back in the 60s, it'll probably floor any of the single malts of today, right? So Old Monk had that kind of a quality because of the distribution, because of the probably lack of awareness in the distillery. And it's very difficult. Ashok touched upon it. It's very difficult to replicate him. To train someone to distill the same kind of spirit, to know about the nuances of the market, it's a very difficult thing to do. The second question that you asked about was the advertising. They had a policy in Mohan Meakin that their spirit, their liquid has to talk for the quality themselves. They had a no advertisement policy in that distillery for over 40 years. So you wouldn't see an ad of Mohan Meakin during that entire period where they said that our whiskey, our spirit, our beer has to talk for itself in terms of quality, and we'll let it sail in the market. So probably that's the reason why you see such a big variance in terms of the brand.
Hi, I'm Arnab. It's more of a marketing related question. That, apart from using the rich Indian culture or the India story, what are the other ways a spirit brand from India can position themselves in the UK or the US market?
I think if you are basically going to sell an Indian brand, it is very essential for you to basically, the moment you go and say that India, in the US or in Europe, the first thing people's mind will entangle with is the vibrant color of this country, the multiple flavors of food across the country, the very culture of this country is all coming to their head. Like for example, Rangolis and Holi. This is what the West remember about India. So when you are basically going to sell a product, not a service, product, I think it is really essential for you to basically have an India story into that. Then that will be a much more probable idea to sell it. I wouldn't say easier than not having an India story. Because at the moment, India as a country is growing rapidly, is one of the top 5 economies of the world. So your image is getting built year on year. So it is wise to leverage that India story into the brand.
But yeah, to Ashok's point as well, I think every single big brand today is investing in India. Like, it is the second most important market for them. Yeah, but
Hi,
last question.
Hi, my name is Subodh, and if this is the last question, I want to hear both from the master distiller and from the connoisseur. What are your thoughts on putting a couple of drops of water in your whiskey before drinking it?
It's a good question. Okay, if it is a quality single malt whiskey, only that, no matter where it was produced, I don't care. First, I want you to basically give respect to the distillery, and then you should basically try it neat regardless of the strength of the whiskey. Now, afterwards, for example, I prefer to have a cask strength whiskey, let's say 60% alcohol by volume. And so I invite you, him, Hemanth and Yamini, we just basically sit and drink together. My first advice would be is basically try it neat as it is, and then you can dilute it with a little quantity of water as you wish, and then have a sip, and then enjoy the flavor. So long you don't add Coke and lemonade, I'm fine with that.
You know, since you pointed the question at a connoisseur and I'm not one, I run the club called SMAC, an amateur. So even after 15 years of drinking whiskey, I still call myself an amateur. But I'm going to add a little different perspective to this, especially the Indian one, and one of the key ethos of my club as well. And I'm probably going to point out to what really happened in terms of the narrative from Scotland. When they came to India, what did they tell us? They told us saying that we don't know how to appreciate whiskey. Why? Because if you look at the way India drinks whiskey, they top the glass up with water, they add ice to it, and probably a little bit more flavoring in terms of lemon sometimes being squeezed into it, and so on and so forth. That story started in 1970s when we started to drink your Glenfiddichs and Glenlivets of the world, and then you said Indians don't know how to drink whiskey, so we will teach you as to how to drink whiskey. And they told us saying that, okay, you sit down, you need to appreciate the whiskey, you need to add a couple of drops of water, the serpents get released in the whiskey, and so forth. Today, the same brands are releasing whiskeys for cocktails, single malt whiskeys for cocktails. They are coming up with, options of as to how, what's that called, highball. Those are the most popular cocktails of whiskey today. And I'm sitting back and wondering, wasn't that the same thing that we were drinking around 30, 40 years ago? So I completely echo what Ashok says in terms of appreciating a good single malt, but I don't think so we should be telling anyone how to drink their whiskeys. I think that, they know very well as to how to drink their whiskeys.